Okay, today's lesson is going to be about slope-intercept form. And we talked last week about what slope is and how to find slope using 2 points. We also talked last week about intercepts, and we talked about knowing how to find x and y intercepts from a graph and from just looking at an equation. So what I want to do today is talk about a form of an equation called slope-intercept form. Slope-intercept form is the most common way that we usually see equations written. It's where the y is by itself on one side and then the rest of the equation is on the other. In this particular form, slope-intercept form, when you have your equation solved for y equals and everything else, the number in front of x, which you see as m in this form of an equation, we know m is slope. So the number in front of x is always going to be your slope. The number at the end, the constant that's by itself, is always going to be our y-intercept. So anytime we look at an equation and it's in slope-intercept form, we can automatically look at and determine the slope and the y-intercept just from the equation without even having to graph. So let's take for an example, if I gave you the equation y equals 2x minus 3. If that were my equation, and it is in slope-intercept form, and I was asked to name the slope and name the y-intercept, then I would just say m, which is the slope, and you can call it m or you can call it slope, is equal to 2. Because the number in front of x, in this case, is 2. And so I'm going to highlight that so you can see where I got that answer. That number, again, could be a whole number, could be a fraction, could be a negative or positive. So the number in front of x is always going to be your slope. Then if I was asked to write down the y-intercept, that's your b. And just like the letter m is always used to indicate slope, the letter b is always used to indicate y-intercept. Not the x, but the y-intercept. And you can abbreviate that y-int period. So the y-intercept, otherwise known as b, is equal to, in this case, negative 3. Remember, if it says minus 3, every time we look at a number, we have to use the sign in front of it. And if it's a minus, that's the same thing as a negative 3. And again, on this, I don't have another highlighter, but I do have a marker. So I'm just going to underline that so that you can see where I got that negative 3 from. So if I'm given an equation and it's already in slope-intercept form, it's pretty easy to pick out the slope and the y-intercept. And we're going to use that later on in the week when we learn to graph equations, because that's going to be really important. But sometimes they give us an equation and it's not in slope-intercept form. And so what we want to do is we want to rearrange it or rewrite the equation so that it does become in slope-intercept form. So that's what we're going to focus on today on this lesson, is taking an equation and rewriting it so that it is in slope-intercept form. So rewrite the equations. I'm going to jot down this direction. Rewrite the equations in slope-intercept form. So that's going to be my directions for these next several examples. So let's take example 1. I'm going to start out with something pretty simple, and then we'll work into some a little bit harder. 9y equals 3x. What you're going to notice in all of these equations is that y is not by itself, like it was in the example above, where you had y equals 2x minus 3. In this equation, and all the examples we're about to do, y has something on the same side with it. So what our goal is to get y by itself, because if we're going to get it in slope-intercept form, we have to isolate the variable y. So we have to get it alone. And the only way to get it alone is to undo everything that's being done to it. Kind of like when we solve equations, we go to the variable y, or whichever variable it is, but in this case we're solving for the variable y. We see what is being done to that y, and we do the opposite to undo it. So in this case, example 1, y is my variable that I'm solving for, and y is being multiplied by 9. So I would do the opposite and I would divide both sides by 9. When I do that, my 9's cancel. That leaves y on the left side equal 3x over 9. I do need to simplify that fraction. 3 over 9 if you take your calculator and simplify it, or if you just know to simplify 3 over 9, you divide the top and bottom by 3. So that would give me 1/3 x. And you can put the 1x over 3, or you can just do the fraction in front of the variable x. So if I'm going to name my slope and my y-intercept using what we did above, so after I rewrite it in slope-intercept form, I'm going to name my slope. Remember, my slope is always the number in front of my x, my variable x. What's in front of my variable x is a fraction, and so my slope is that fraction 1/3. My y-intercept, if you look above, the y-intercept was the constant at the end of the equation by itself. In this case, there's not a number. There's not a constant at the end, but that means that there is nothing there, and we know that nothing is the same as 0. So the y-intercept is 0 in this case. Okay, let's go ahead and look at another example. Example 2. Let's take the equation 3x plus y equals 14. Okay, if I take this equation, let me move my page up. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to try to get y by itself, so I'm going to try to isolate the variable y. Let's see what's being done to the y. Y is being added by 3x. So I'm going to do the opposite of that, and I'm going to subtract 3x to get rid of it. When I do that, 3x minus 3x on the left cancels. That leaves a positive y to come down. Bring down your equal sign. On the right side, 14 minus 3x, those are not like terms, so we cannot subtract those. We just need to bring them down. And when I bring them down, I'm going to put the x term first. So the negative 3x goes first. 14 is a positive, so I would put plus 14. Now this equation is in slope-intercept form. So if I want to name my slope would be the number in front of x, which is negative 3. My y-intercept would be the constant or the number on the end, which is a positive 14. And that's all you do for that one. Let's do one more example, and then I'm going to let you practice some by yourself. So for a final example, 2x minus 8y equals 32. Okay, so to do this one, we're going to start on the side with the y. That's the variable I'm trying to solve for. I want to isolate the y. So let's see what's being done to the y. The y is being multiplied by negative 8. And it also has a 2x at the beginning that's being added to it. And I know it's being added because that 2x is positive. Always look at the sign in front of it. And we know when there's not a sign, there's understood to be a plus there or positive. So the first thing I want to do if I'm solving for y is I want to get rid of this 2x term. So I'm going to do the opposite. And I'm going to subtract 2x on each side. When I do that, my 2x's cancel. And I bring everything straight down. That would be minus or negative 8y equals 32 minus 2x. You cannot subtract that because they are not like terms. So I'm going to write that down with my x term being first. That would be negative 2x. The 32 will come down as a positive or plus 32. Now I'm not finished. Because my y still has a negative 8 beside it. So that y is being multiplied by negative 8. So I would divide both sides by negative 8. Now what you have to do when you divide this side by negative 8, that's like we've been doing. But the other side, to divide that side by negative 8, we have to divide everything by negative 8. So I have to divide this term by negative 8, and I have to divide this term by negative 8. And then let's just bring down and see what happens. The negative 8's cancel here. That leaves y equals On the right side, we've got a fraction here, negative 2 over negative 8. Well, negative over negative becomes positive. 2 over 8 simplifies to 1 over 4. The screen went out. Bring down your x. Now on this side, we've got a positive 32 divided by a negative 8. And I just want one sign. I don't want to have to put plus negative. So I'm just going to, because a positive 32 divided by a negative 8 is negative 4, I'm just going to put minus 4. Now if you put plus negative 4, is that wrong? No. But when you name your slope and your y-intercept, you just got to make sure you know how to name the sign on those. The slope is the number in front of my x. In this case, it's a fraction, 1/4. The y-intercept is the number at the end of the equation, the constant, which is a minus 4, which makes that a negative 4. Okay, so that's how to take equations and rearrange or rewrite them in slope-intercept form. Remember, you have to keep in mind, when we rewrite equations in slope-intercept form, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get y by itself and then equals mx plus b on the other side. So we always want to make sure that as we're solving for slope-intercept form, the whole goal is to know that we are trying to isolate the y and get it by itself with everything else on the other side. Okay, I'm going to let you try the practice problems now and see how you do with those.